a number of the books could not have been written by the authors who are claimed as their authors, because many of these people claimed as their authors were illiterate. Peter, James, Jude could almost certainly not read and write, so they didn't write these books.
Scholars have long known, for example, that whoever wrote 2 Peter, it was not Peter. There are debates about 1 Peter. A lot of scholars think Peter wrote 1 Peter, and I'm not one of them. Doing my research for this book, I decided there's no way Peter wrote 1 Peter or 2 Peter, and for a very simple reason. Peter could not write. By the way, the New Testament says that Peter was illiterate. Acts chapter 4, verse 13 literally says that he could not read.
How can one possibly overcome these arguments against Peter's authorship of the two books that bear his name? Actually, it is quite simple. Let's take on Erhman's claims in reverse order. First, Acts 4:13.
When they saw the courage of Peter and John, and realized that they were unschooled, ordinary men, they were astonished, and they took note that these men had been with Jesus.
Notice that the point of this passage is that the members of the Sanhedrin were astonished that Peter and John could have addressed them with such boldness. Obviously, Peter and John were able to speak in a manner that impressed this group of educated men. This point alone refutes Bart Erhman's claims. Also, the word translated as uneducated can mean illiterate, as Erhman states in this video, but primarily refers to someone who is unlettered, meaning that they lacked formal education. The Greek word here is agrammatoi. One Greek lexicon's entry on this word states, "It pertains to one who has not acquired a formal education," referring primarily to formal training. Some persons have assumed that agrammatoi in Acts 4:13 means illiterate in the sense of not being able to read or write, but this is highly unlikely in view of the almost universal literacy in New Testament times, and especially as the result of extensive synagogue schools. Evidently, agrammatoi in Acts 4:13 refers to a lack of formal rabbinic training. So in Acts 4:13, this term more than likely conveys the idea that Peter and John were not educated in the same fashion as the members of the Sanhedrin. Also, unless the members of the Sanhedrin had asked Peter and John to read or write something during their hearing, how would these leaders know if the disciples were literate or not? Second, it is true that Peter and John were fishermen and not scholars. However, fishermen would need to be able to read and write with some degree of proficiency in order to conduct business. Finally, even if Peter and John were illiterate, there is nothing that would have prevented them from using scribes to record their words. In the 1st century AD, scribes were commonly commissioned by rich, poor, and middle-class citizens. If Peter and John used scribes, would that mean that they were not the authors of the books attributed to them? I suppose in a very technical sense they would not have written these letters, but this is hardly newsworthy. We know that Paul, who was definitely literate, sometimes used scribes to pen his letters, much like a CEO may dictate a letter to a secretary, who writes or types the words. No one would deny that the CEO is the author of the letter. In a similar fashion, the apostles could have used scribes to write their words.